Welcome to the recording of the Leading Sheep webinar on using EIDs in sheep. This webinar was presented on the 10th of May 2018 by Phil Holmes and Anthony Uren. This is part 2 in a series of short recordings from this webinar, with Anthony Uren talking about their property Congi and why they introduced EIDs.
So I've been asked just to provide an example of how a commercial enterprise, and one we're undertaking here at Congi, how production gains can be driven with the use of EIDs. And as Phil's mentioned, measurement and electronic identification go hand in hand. As a background, as Phil mentioned, I manage Congi Station here at Woolbrook, which is on the northern tablelands in New South Wales. We're sort of midway between Armidale and Tamworth. Congi is 10,000 hectares of light granite soil. Just a photo there illustrating the sort of landscape. Unfortunately, it doesn't look like that at the moment. We run 42,000 fine wool merino sheep with a flock average micron of 16.8. We have a 600 ewe ram breeding nucleus, and we also run 1,500 head of Hereford Angus cross cattle, which we sending steers into the feeder market. As you can see by that previous slide, with 40-odd thousand sheep, the merino enterprise makes up about 60% of our total DSC. So it's a large enterprise and a large driver of the profit in our business. If we look back at the 25 years of benchmarking that we're lucky enough to have it on hand, it's indicated over that time that 68% of the merino enterprise income is derived from wool. So that's a great percentage of income, and that's varied down to not much lower than that, but it has got up to 80%. And bearing in mind, fine wool, which we're a big player in, has been in low deciles, and meat prices have been in high deciles. So over that period, it just shows the importance of wool income to our merino enterprise. And as Phil has mentioned, we look at from a point of fleece value. That is what's driving the income. That's what we're shearing off the sheep. So our aim is to drive fleece value across the flock and retain those animals that have the highest fleece value and sell those that have the lowest fleece value. Now, to drive fleece value, it's made up of a combination of factors, obviously fibre diameter, fleece weight, staple strength and yield being the main ones. So there's a multitude of traits there to collect. And if we add into that, which most of the indexes that people use have a body weight component, and specific to the northern tablelands, a worm egg count. So as I say, there's a multitude of traits to collect, and to do that visually and manually on our scale becomes very prohibitive. So it was in our view that a traditional classing system, being very subjective, would make that very difficult to achieve. An experiment I do, and I know there's another seed stock producer down the road does the same thing. We have a lot of farm groups come through. We often put 20, 30 sheep up a race and ask them to identify them or rank them in order, or to select the worst or the lowest performing sheep, and no one to this point has been able to do it apart from one person, and that was the bus driver of one of the tour groups. So if I was to hand someone a stick of rattle and ask them to walk down the race and rank them from the highest performer to the lowest performer, it's a very difficult task. So the obvious way and the only way to achieve that and to rank animals and to drive performance is through the use of indexing. As I mentioned, a multitude of traits, and the read errors that can occur can range from 5 to 15%. And if that error rate is occurring on every trait you collect, you can end up with the result that really is not accurate and not doing you a service to head in the right direction. So we now apply an electronic identification to every lamb at lamb marking right across the flock. Approximately well, back in 2010, sorry, I'll just go back a step. So Phil mentioned weather trial data, and you can also see that in sire evaluation sites. There's quite a variation across flocks, or between differing flocks. Some, as Phil mentioned, can show fleece values of $100 and others down to $20 and $30. So we wanted to interrogate how that sat within our own merino enterprise. So we looked at a sample of 700 ewes. Those ewes were actually selected purely on micron. Back at that point, micron premiums were quite high. Our aim was to drive down micron. So as a driver for our nucleus, the finest ewes were selected. So we had micron and fleece weight data on each of those animals, and we applied a 5-year average wool price to each of those. And the numbers speak for themselves. So within that 700 ewes, all the same age, there was a fleece variation of $107 through to $24, meaning a difference of $83 odd. So it made sense to us that you need to drive fleece value and drive performance within the merino enterprise. You need to retain those animals with the highest fleece value. So that raised the question on how do we filter out these lower performing animals and take them out of the flock. EIDs are obviously the main way we could achieve that. For us, this means indexing approximately 13,500 animals every year, collecting 40,000 individual measurements or pieces of data. We started initially doing this with the ewe drop, collecting data on their first shearing as a 1-year-old. So we could run an index across those ewes and retain those ewes with the highest fleece value and those that are going to progress our genetic gain the most. We've since moved on, and we do that across the weather drop as well. So we're retaining those with the highest fleece values.
Thank you for watching this part of the recording from the Leading Sheep webinar on using EIDs in sheep. If you have any questions or would like more information, please visit the Leading Sheep website, www.leadingsheep.com.au.